All right, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think now's a great time to get started. So my name's Kat, and today I'll be running this webinar for you. So this webinar is about ELogs, ELDs, and AOBRDs, and understanding what's the difference. So the ELD mandate was actually announced back in December 2015, and it was finalized in December, or I should say, it was finalized in February of 2016. So the implementation deadline for this is just a couple of months away, and people I know still have a lot of questions. One of the reasons for that is really because there's been a lot of misinformation and myths floating around about those ELogs, the ELDs, and AOBRDs. And this does lead to a lot of confusion amongst owner-operators and fleets. So a lot of people still aren't sure which tools they need to become compliant, if any, for that matter. So with the mandate rapidly approaching, I know many of you are looking to make a decision in regards to what, you're going to do. So you're doing your research, looking at solutions that'll suit your need, and discovering, what's going to keep you running in compliance with the law. So during today's webinar, I'll be explaining the difference between ELogs, ELDs, and AOBRDs, and tell you which ones are being mandated by the FMCSA, okay, and hopefully help you find the right solution for you. So before we actually get started, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So I've conducted a few of these sessions throughout the week and have been recording them. So at the end of this session today, I will definitely be posting one of those recordings online where you guys will have access to it and be able to review that. So after this session, within a couple of days, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with the link to the webinar and some other material that we'll be talking about down the road as well. Now, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the question box that's actually located on the GoToWebinar control panel. That box is, sometimes in front of your screen. It might have been minimized already, but if it's blocking some of the screen, you can also minimize it. There's a little rectangle with a white arrow in that toolbox, in a little toolbar attached to it. And you can click that to minimize it and also use that same button to reopen it when you're ready to pose your questions, or if you want to access anything I may be sharing within the chat window later. Okay. Now, we know that if you have those questions, I will try to do my best to answer them throughout the presentation, but otherwise I'll be answering those at the end if I'm not able to get to them throughout the presentation. And, sometimes we do get a lot of questions, so I do want to apologize in advance if I'm not able to get to all of them right away. Sometimes some also come in slightly after the session is done, so I assure you I won't leave any questions unanswered. So if I'm not able to get to them on the webinar, I'll make sure to get back to you and get you the answers that you need. Okay, and again, along with the webinar recording, I will be providing you a link to some more detailed information, and you'll have that for yourself as well afterwards. So I think now's a great time to get started. Here's a little bit about what we're going to cover in today's webinar. So first, we're going to briefly discuss the ELD mandate. So let's talk about why it's being implemented and whether or not you even need to worry about complying with it. Then we'll talk about ELogs. So in our terms, ELogs actually refers to electronic logbooks, and I'll explain what that means. Then we'll go over the different terminology that's used for connected logging device. And I want to highlight which devices are compliant after that December 2017 mandate deadline. We'll also spend a lot of time looking at the AOBRDs, the ELDs, and the difference between the two. Okay? Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll understand, or at least have a much better understanding of the differences between those two systems. And I want to talk about the 2-year AOBRD extension. This is very important for business owners and owner-operators alike. So it's really great to understand how that works and also take advantage of it, right? Now, we're also going to have a little informal quiz. It's more of a recap of some of the things that we've been covering, just to make sure, that and kind of test the knowledge and make sure that we're kind of getting all the information that we need. And then finally, we'll also talk about, Fleet Complete, AT&T Fleet Complete's Big Road solution to the ELD mandate. Okay. We'll also end the webinar, as I mentioned, with a question and answer period, and I'll be able to reply to your questions at that time. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, some of you might have missed that while you were logging in, but the ELD mandate was actually announced in December 2015 and finalized in February 2016. And the first deadline for compliance, so the first important date is December 18th, 2017. So this is the time when all non-exempt CMV, so commercial motor vehicle drivers, are going to need to have an ELD or an AOBRD installed in their vehicle. Okay. The final deadline is December 16th, 2019. So by this time, everyone will need to have a fully compliant electronic logging device installed into their vehicle. And obviously, we'll be going through what the differences are between the two. So if you've chosen an AOBRD, which is automatic onboard recording device, you'll need to swap it with an ELD. Or in the case of our solution, it's just a simple software update to turn the system from AOBRD into a fully ELD functionality before that December 2019 deadline. So we're actually going to look at the rules and the differences between AOBRD and ELD very, very shortly. Now, electronic logging devices, better known as ELDs, they're being mandated really in order to enforce and keep track of the hours of service regulations while preventing fatigue driving, right, which ultimately makes the roads a safer place for everyone. So the actual official statement from the FMCSA on the subject was that ELDs make tracking hours of service easier and more accurate, that this helps prevent both deliberate and unintentional hours of service violations, and it helps drivers avoid fines due to mistakes in paper logs. So improved compliance with hours of service rules ensures that drivers have time for adequate rest and to operate commercial vehicles safely. So more accurately and consistent hours of service records also facilitates the enforcement and support of carrier business operations, such as effective dispatching. So this is essentially the stand and the core as to why this is being implemented and the benefit that the FMCSA feels will come from this. Now, before we get into the ins and outs and understanding what you need to be compliant, let's find out if you even need to be compliant in the first place. So one of the questions I think that we get all the time from business owners and owner-operators is whether or not the mandate even applies to them. Okay, so under the ELD mandate, owner-operators are required to use an ELD. So there's no exemption based on being a single truck operation or owner-operator. Okay. However, you may qualify for one of the following exemptions. Now, first exemption is really the drivers that aren't currently required to keep records of duty status. So if you're not doing paper logs today and don't have to, for example, short haul drivers, well then you would not need to run an ELD unless you happen to go outside of the short haul classification. Okay. Now, the next, and this also ties in a little bit to the short haul, is the 8 in 30 rule. So what this means is drivers who are required to keep records of duty status for no more than 8 days in a 30-day period are exempt. Now, one of the important things to remember with this is that it's a rolling window of 30 consecutive days, so not like a calendar month, right? So before deciding if you're exempt, you might want to make sure that you're not going over that 8-day period or 8 days of needing logs in a 30-day period. So if I can elaborate on that a little bit, if you happen to be doing, maybe you fall within the exemption for short haul, but there are some days out of the month where you do go out of that 100 or 150 air mile radius, and you're doing that for more than 8 days out of the month, you may still need ELogs. If it's less than 8 days that you drive outside of your short haul, then there's an exemption for that, okay? Now, the next exemption is about drive-away, tow-away operations. Okay, so if the vehicle that you're driving is actually part of the shipment, so it's empty, it's for sale, for lease, or repair, then you're not required to use an ELD. So the reason for this is actually that the FMCSA doesn't really expect you to carry multiple connectors and cables with you in order to have something that works with every vehicle. Because you probably won't know, until maybe even the day of which vehicle you're driving and which cables will be needed. Based on year, make, model, the connectors that are necessary definitely do differ. There are a few variations of those. So there is an exemption for this type of work. Now, there's also an exemption based on the year of the vehicle as well. So anyone that's driving a commercial motor vehicle with a model year of 1999 or prior, okay, will not need an ELD. And they can actually continue to create their records of duty status in the same way they are today. So, if you're using paper, that's one thing. You could also be using an electronic log, so just an electronic replacement for paper. That would be fine. So it doesn't have to be an engine-connected device for models that are of that age. And the reason is really because the technology and the connections aren't really compatible with older engines, and it would be far too difficult and costly for the FMCSA to expect drivers to comply with that. So if you're not sure if the model or the year about the model or year of your vehicle, you can definitely find your VIN number by looking inside the door frame, and there are many sources for checking that for the year. Now, finally, there's the 100 or 150 air mile exemption. So if you're a local driver and you only drive within a 100 air mile radius of your starting point, you don't currently need to keep paper logs, and therefore you don't have to have an ELD installed. So this also applies to non-CDL freight drivers who drive within a 150 air mile radius of their starting location. Okay, so just to reiterate a little bit, owner-operators, you've got a truck, you're not exempt from the mandate. If you're a CMV driver who currently keeps records of duty status, you'll likely need to comply with the ELD mandate, unless you qualify for one of the exemptions that we just talked about. Now, ELogs or electronic logs, that's actually just a generic industry term that's never really had, like, let's say, an official standing. Because of this, it's kind of been a catch-all term to refer to all of the connected logging devices. So ELDs, AOBRDs, as well as electronic logbooks. Everyone tends to sometimes just call it, an ELog, right? But there are some differences. So ELog, or an electronic logbook, is essentially just an electronic representation of a paper log. So this alone causes some confusion because depending on how you're hearing the term being used, it might be referred to when speaking about an ELD mandate compliance device, and it might not be. So this leads some people that are using an electronic logbook now, like an app, to believe that they're ready for the upcoming mandate. And unfortunately, an electronic logbook alone isn't enough to keep you in compliance. And we'll definitely get into the details about that just a little bit later. Now, for the purpose of this webinar, when we're talking about ELog, we're just going to be talking about an electronic logbook, like our Big Road mobile app, okay? Now, when we talk about what that ELog happens to be, right, one of the first things we should do is maybe go through some of the terminology. So I mentioned an electronic logbook, like the free Big Road mobile app. They do have tons of advantages over paper logs. So they've actually been programmed to understand the DOT hours of service regulations, and that makes managing your hours of service much easier, especially compared to paper. Right? Drivers who use paper logs often run into the same issues. There's form and manner errors that are virtually eliminated when you're using an electronic logbook because the app does a lot of the work for you, right? It even can alert you to potential violations. So we know that even little mistakes can be seen as a big deal to DOT officers and can sometimes even result in a fine. So moving from paper and using an electronic logbook can save you, money, and it can also help you protect your CSA score. So electronic logbooks are also great, obviously, because they help you cut down on paperwork and just allow you to focus on the road. So although electronic logbooks, they can make hours of service tracking and compliance easier, again, we have to emphasize that the logbook alone isn't an ELD mandate compliant solution. When we're talking about the mandate, section 395.2 of that ELD mandate states that an ELD must be integrally synchronized with specific operations of the motor vehicle in which it's installed. So what does this mean? It basically means that it has to be engine connected. So the electronic logbook alone is not. Engine connected devices like ELDs and AOBRDs, there's a unit in the vehicle and it actually connects to an app in order to communicate with and complete the automated logs. So an electronic logbook alone isn't enough to keep you compliant after December 18th of this year. Now, there's a few different terms, again, that are used when we're talking about engine-connected devices. And the reason for this is honestly that there's been a few iterations of the upcoming mandate before it became finalized. The one that you're going to hear most often now is ELD. And depending on how long you've been in the industry, you've probably already been really familiar with the term AOBRDs. So you might even also sometimes hear the acronym EOBR. So we've heard that used as well sometimes. So before we talk about the difference, let's just briefly define those actual terms. So ELD, we'll start with that. An electronic logging device, ELD, it's actually, as I mentioned, a piece of hardware that is plugged into the ECM port of a vehicle. And when it's plugged in, the ELD automatically records information from the engine in order to record the driver's hours of service and other vehicle info. Okay, this is actually the most common or current term for engine-connected logging devices, and it is the one that's being mandated by the FMCSA. Now, AOBRDs, automatic onboard recording devices, they've been around since 1988, right? That's when the FMCSA defined them as either electric, electronic, electromechanical, or mechanical device that happens to connect to a vehicle's engine to automatically and accurately record a driver's status. So it was essentially detecting, movement and so forth. Like an ELD, the AOBRD must also be integrally synchronized with the specific operations of that commercial motor vehicle in which it's installed. So it's an engine-connected device. It's a connected device, not just, an application and a form. Now, what many operators or fleet owners don't know is that although ELDs are what are being mandated, if you actually have an AOBRD system in place prior to December 2017, this deadline that's coming up, you can actually continue to use it until December 2019. So there's a lot of reasons why that's actually a great option, and I'll explain those as well very soon. Now, that other term that I mentioned, EOBR, that stands for electronic onboard recorder, and it was actually defined previously as an electronic device attached to a commercial motor vehicle, which is used to record the amount of time the vehicle is being driven. Now, that term was originally supposed to replace an AOBRD. It was proposed back in 2004, but the ruling was never finalized. So that's kind of an old term that's just floating around, and it isn't really relevant anymore. So what we're talking about nowadays is usually either the AOBRD that many people may have or that you will need, and ELD. I hope that clarifies a little bit some of that terminology. Now, there's a lot of similarities in the way that ELDs and AOBRDs operate, and both can keep you running in compliance with the ELD mandate. And the reason for that is because part of the mandate, as part of it, AOBRDs can be grandfathered in. So they can actually be used for up to 2 hours after that first ELD deadline. So to take advantage of that, though, you actually need to have an AOBRD that meets that FMCSA's definition and that has been installed in your vehicles prior to that ELD mandate, which is December of 2017. Okay, so that includes our Big Road solution, which is fully compliant AOBRD, and it's also ELD ready. So if you've got it installed before the deadline, you can continue to use it until December 16, 2019. And at that time, you'll need to transition to full ELD mandate compliance. Now, this is really a great option for a lot of owner-operators and business owners because the AOBRDs do offer a little more flexibility. And it's also a nice way to get used to this new technology and this new way of logging so that you can switch when you're ready. So with our device, you can get it now, and you're good until 2019. So what we recommend that you do, and what we're seeing most owner-operators do, is they'll run it as an AOBRD, take advantage of the additional 2 years, and then you have the flexibility, to edit your logs and time and learn the ins and outs of connected logging before the ELD required mandates. So Again, the dash link, the device that we have, they can be run and they're ELD compliant, and they're available for you when you're ready to transition. So some people transition at the end of the year, and some people may decide they want to go full-on ELD earlier, but that's a choice that you'll actually have. And it's very easy because it is just a software update. There's no new hardware. There's no need to swap out the equipment. Right? Now that we know that ELDs and AOBRDs are similar in that they're engine-connected devices that automatically record your drive time and vehicle info, where they really differ, I should say, is really in the amount of data that they record, and most importantly for you, it's really the amount of information that they would display. So let's talk a little bit about that and the information that's being gathered. Now let's talk about what is required on the logs, right? One versus the other. So according to 395.15, which is the code of the federal regulations, the AOBRD is required essentially to read the truck, the shipment, other carrier information, as well as an hours of service summary that includes, your duty status changes, the vehicle location, drive time, and device malfunctions. Now, on the other hand, ELDs must record all of that data that I just talked about, but also in addition to that, they have to record intermediate events in between. So with intermediate events while driving, like the location, the CMV status. So is your vehicle on, off? That goes on the log. When you log in and out, that goes on the log. If we're getting at any diagnostic data or engine malfunctions need to go on there as well, and unidentified driving events also need to be recorded for the ELD mandate. We'll talk a little bit about that, but essentially unidentified driving is, someone taking the vehicle that's not logged in, the vehicle moves, someone needs to be responsible for those hours. And we'll talk about, I'll explain a little later how that gets managed as well. So in the next few slides, I'm going to highlight some of the differences in the way that we're actually recording information for either AOBRD or ELD. So the first thing I'll talk about is the location itself. So the AOBRD, that records a vehicle's location at every duty status change. So really when you're going on duty, off duty, or you put yourself in or out of drive mode, it wants the location. And right now with an AOBRD, that location can actually be entered manually by the driver. As part of the mandate, a driver could type in, the city and state that they're in. Now, in our system, it does look for the GPS and it will populate it, but it is a manually editable field, right? So if I'm going on duty, I'm in a building somewhere, I might not have GPS status, I could actually, enter that in manually. Now, with ELDs, however, the location needs to be automatically recorded anytime there's a change in duty status, as well as every 60 minutes while driving. So it's going to want to know every 60 minutes if you're on the road, it's going to want that position of where you are, and that will end up on the log. On top of that, it'll want that position, it'll want a location when the ignition is turned on and off, and at the start and end of yard moves or personal conveyance mode. Now, and we'll talk a little bit about those as well. So the accuracy of this as well needs to be within 1 mile when I'm on duty driving with an ELD. And if I put myself in personal conveyance mode, for example, the accuracy of the GPS needs to be within 10 miles. Now, the reason that there's a little bit less accuracy required for personal mode is just to give some additional privacy, right? So it's being tracked to the nearest town or city rather than a precise GPS location when you're in personal mode. Now, in regards to the duty statuses themselves, another example of how much more restrictive an ELD might be than an AOBRD is the way that we would deal with duty status changes. So the ELD is much more automated than an AOBRD, which means there's a little bit more flexibility to that, right? So for example, with the ELD, and this is part of the requirement, if a driver's vehicle stops moving for 5 consecutive minutes, and the driver hasn't responded to a prompt that's going to show up on the screen within 60 seconds, their status will automatically change to on duty, not driving. Okay. Whereas with AOBRDs, you're not required to change a duty status if the vehicle is no longer in motion. So with the ELDs, there's a lot more automated changes when you're in drive and when you're stopping that take place. Now, a little bit more on the personal conveyance and the yard move as well. So personal conveyance is essentially when you're using a commercial motor vehicle, you're unladen, and it's for a personal reason. So let's say, you're at a truck stop, you're at a hotel, you're now going to use the company vehicle that is empty to go to get some, dinner, and you need to use that for a personal reason. So this is something that some people use, some people don't, but it can be dealt with. The situation is actually dealt with fairly similarly with AOBRDs and ELDs. I mean, you're considered to be off-duty in both circumstances, but the difference for this personal conveyance is really just in the location data and other information that's being recorded during the time that you are in personal mode. Again, let's say the GPS won't be as accurate for that location when you're in personal mode, for example. Every vehicle event, again, both on duty and off though, is recorded and displayed when we're talking about an ELD, okay? So the AOBRDs don't display this information except to say that you've changed your status to personal conveyance and it shows the location of the vehicle. So ELD is obviously going to be displaying a lot more information even when you're in personal mode. Now, yard move, those are usually used for instances where, let's say you're parked in a yard, you're asked to move your vehicle, you need to accommodate another driver, or you're just making really small moves in a shipping yard. So you need to move a little bit, but you aren't really driving per se. So yard move allows you to move your vehicle a short distance. So in our current Big Road app, it is 5 miles at a time with no maximum speed. So you're able to use multiple instances of yard move if you require it. Now, when you're running an ELD, you'll actually need to be put into on duty to use this function. And with an AOBRD, you're still able to use yard move without affecting your hours of service. So this, among other bonuses, is one of the reasons why AOBRDs do give you a little more flexibility up until that 2019 date. Now, this subject is one that we do get a lot of questions about. A lot of people want to know what is available to edit with an AOBRD versus an ELD. So essentially, in an AOBRD, you can actually edit anything except for your actual drive time, okay? So the drive time is one of those things that's pretty firm in both AOBRD and ELD. So with an AOBRD, you can't edit drive time unless the driving was an error, right? Obviously, because you're switching it manually. Some people are still doing the change on and off manually, in which case you may be able to edit it. But with an ELD, you can't edit that at all. So with an AOBRD, you can still edit your vehicle's location, so if the city or town needs to be edited because that was entered in error, or you need to change an event or adjust your duty status from on to off, or go on duty driving and indicate that as personal conveyance or yard move. You're still able to do that with an AOBRD. With an ELD, you can't really change anything that's been automatically recorded. So from the web application, there would be very few limited edits that you as a driver, let's say, or you as an administrator would be able to make, because they'll actually need to be annotated. So there needs to be a comment added to any duty status change that you happen to make. So for example, with an ELD, you can go from off duty to on duty not driving, but you'll have to add a note that explains that maybe, for example, you logged training time incorrectly as off duty. Something else that happens with the ELD is that edit and annotation actually needs to be verified by the driver in the mobile app. So an edit would actually not be accepted unless the driver confirms it from the mobile app and resubmits that record of duty status. So, one of the reasons for this is really because it's more of accountability, so the driver can acknowledge that this is in fact true, a true reflection of their log and of their activity that day. Okay, so other than those limited edits that you're able to make, essentially once an event has been recorded, it's virtually set in stone. So this is another great reason to stick with AOBRDs for a little while longer as kind of a stepping stone into the connected logging while you get adjusted to the new, more restrictive rules, for example. Now, in regards to the history of editing and who can see that, with an AOBRD, it's going to record, in the back end who made the edit and when. But if you're displaying your log, it's actually not going to show that in the edit history. Now, as an ELD, on the other hand, it's going to record that same information and more, and that information is actually readily going to be displayed to the officer. So you would actually see that there was an edit, the time that it was edited, and by whom. So I'll actually show you in just a few slides from now an example of what each of those logs would actually look like to a DOT officer. So speaking of those inspections, just a few notes to make. DOT officers, they aren't able to see as much detail about what's going on in your day with the AOBRD. Something else to ponder is that DOT officers or people doing inspections, they're also very comfortable right now with the AOBRDs and what information is being displayed. I mean, because these things have been around since 1988, so they're very familiar with them, right? Because the officers or people doing inspections may not be as familiar with ELDs, perhaps they're not as rehearsed during inspections with them, right? So that's not as familiar to them. So there is a little more potential for it to go a little bit more smoothly and quickly with an AOBRD, hopefully getting you on the road faster, okay? So we've even actually had comments from inspectors on how much they do like our Big Road solution because it is very easy for them to use, which is great because we want a solution that's easy for the drivers and easy for everyone who has to interact with it to get everybody just out of there and back to work as quickly as possible. So here is actually a look at what a daily log currently looks like as an AOBRD. Okay, so obviously the best way to explain this is to show you. So right now you're looking at what is visible to an officer upon inspection. The log header has the driver, the carrier, the trailer, and shipment information. And there's your duty status graph, things that people are very familiar with seeing. And that's going to be followed by your duty status events. So this is going to include the time, location, duration, and status as well. So it's actually fairly straightforward. Now, here's a log with the ELD mandate. It's actually the same day, but now represented if we were going by all of the requirements of an ELD. So you can tell the header and the duty graph pretty much look the same, but there's a great deal more events and more recorded information being displayed. So under the duty graph, you've got an ELD record. It's going to display not only your duty status changes, but the ELD status. It's going to have the commercial motor vehicle status, so whether it was on, ignition off. And it's going to have those intermediate events that we were talking about. So, where your location was every hour that you were driving. So if they're present, those electronic logging devices, ELDs, also have to show a list of diagnostic events and malfunctions as part of your daily log. Now, as you can see, the detail about each of these events is also expanded. So under ELD, each event is going to have the time, the type of event, the vehicle location, the odometer reading, the engine hours, and the event origin as well, which will show whether this was a change that happened automatically or whether it was manually entered by the driver. So I'm actually going to switch back so that we can see again in comparison what the AOBRD daily log looks like and the ELD one. So obviously there's a lot less information on here, and if we switch back to the ELD version, you can tell that there's a lot more information at that point. So, by choosing a solution like our Big Road solution now, you can actually use it as an AOBRD, as I mentioned, and it can very easily be updated to an ELD down the road. So if you've got that in place now, you've got a little added flexibility, and you're able to take advantage of that 2-year deadline extension. So as long as it's in prior to December 18th, 2017, you can run it as an AOBRD up until 2019, December. So that's essentially kind of what those logs would look like for you, and that's a real good display of the different types of information. Those are essentially the real differences between an ELD and an AOBRD. So we'll do just a quick little knowledge check. I'll just kind of run through these questions with you quickly. Feel free to kind of ponder them, but I want to make sure to recap some of this information for you. So true or false, if you're using an electronic logbook now, you're ready to be compliant with the ELD mandate. So I think one of the first things we had talked about was, in fact, that this would be false, because the logbook itself doesn't make you compliant. It does have to be an engine-connected device in order to be compliant with the mandate. Now, the other question is in regards to those exemptions. So of these situations, which one would be exempt for the ELD mandate? Drivers who keep records of duty status no more than 8 days in the 30-day period, single truck operations, and drivers who operate within 300 air miles of their starting location, or all of the above. So the answer to this one, as much as I'd like to say all of the above, is actually only those drivers, in this case, that are using logs, so whether it's paper or ELogs at the moment, and that need those logs less than 8 days, or no more than 8 days in a 30-day period. And if you recall, that period is not a month calendar, it is actually a rolling 30-day period. Now, next, if you've got an AOBRD, when do you need to get an ELD? So that one could be a little bit of a tricky question. So December 16, 2019 is actually the date. So if you've got the AOBRD, you're good. You have an extension until December 2019 to get an ELD or to use the ELD compliant solution. Now, you can use yard move without it affecting your hours of service with an ELD. That one's tricky as well. So essentially, the question is really false, because with an AOBRD, prior to the ELD mandate, you actually have more flexibility about when and how to apply a yard move. Whereas with the ELD, it's more restrictive, and the times and locations of going in and out of yard move are all recorded and also reported on and displayed, for that matter. Now, also just a quick recap of what a DOT officer could see in your daily log when you use an AOBRD. So if you recall some of those things that will actually show up in the first version, which is AOBRD, we're looking at time, location, the duration of the duty status, so how long you were on duty, off duty driving, and the locations. Once you switch to ELD, that's where they get to see things like engine hours, diagnostic events. You need to account for unidentified driving, the duration of those duty statuses, and also the intermediate events. So every hour that you're on the road, all of that comes in only afterwards with an ELD. So hopefully this little recap has helped kind of solidify some of the differences between the two and all of the things that we've been talking about so far in this session. Now, we've covered a lot of information, and obviously now it's up to you to find a solution that's going to meet your unique needs. I'm sure you guys wear a lot of hats throughout the day. You've got so many things to think about, and I'm sure you're also maybe concerned, if you don't have a solution yet, you're concerned about how this is going to affect your company and your bottom line. So you really do need a solution that's going to make compliance easy for you and hopefully without breaking the bank. And that's why I just want to briefly talk to you about our AT&T Fleet Complete Big Road solution, the device and the mobile app. It really is the most affordable, reliable, simple, flexible ELD solution available today. So we'll start with the mobile app so you can see how that looks. So this is actually our ELog, or electronic logbook, and our hours of service management application. So this mobile app, the Big Road mobile app, is actually completely free. So for owner-operators or fleet owners and for drivers to use, it can actually be downloaded to a smartphone or a tablet from the Google Play and iTunes Store. Now, I've actually had a question before, which was about whether or not it's better to put it on a smartphone or a tablet. And really, it does come down to personal choice. I've heard it many times. Maybe drivers, some drivers like to use their phones. Others might complain that, oh, it's too small, and they've got big fingers, they can't type on it. And it might be visibility. Maybe you're doing other things. So it all boils down to a personal choice. It does work on both, Apple, or I should say Android and iOS devices. Okay, so that's a choice for you as well. One thing to note, though, is that it does essentially, part of the mandate does require that it's mounted. So it does need to be, whatever you choose, it does need to be mounted and visible for the driver, so that if there are any warnings or anything that pop up, they can see it clearly without fiddling. What good is a warning if your phone is tucked in your pocket, right? So that is also part of those requirements. Now, the app obviously takes some of the guesswork out of logging, right? It enables you to create clean, inspectable, error-free logs while accurately tracking your hours of service. We do get a lot of feedback about how drivers enjoy using this because it does make their jobs easier, and they don't have to worry about, making the wrong calculations or running over their hours because you're looking at the clock, and trying to do the math, or even getting violations potentially for something that could have been easily avoidable. I am proud to say the app is actually one of the top rated apps in both platforms. So for iOS and Android, in their markets, we're consistently getting 4.5 and 5-star rating from the users. And these are users, like drivers that are actually having to use this every day. So we really encourage you to give it a try for yourself. Again, the app is free to download. You can either go and search for Big Road in Google Play or iTunes, or if you go to bigroad.com/driver, you can actually enter in your phone number and it will send you the correct link to the correct app for the device that you're currently using. That's just one way to look at it. So this is essentially, the mobile app, the ELog portion of the solution. Now, the solution that everyone should really be considering now, if you're going to need a compliant solution, is actually the device. So the dash link, the unit that goes into the vehicle itself. Now, with an electronic logging device mandate kind of getting closer, owner-operators are really starting to make that move as soon as possible, not only because you want to comply, but also because you've seen how the actual engine-connected logging can drastically improve your operations. So you do get all of the additional benefits, essentially, of those telematics. And getting on, a little bit sooner is also really great because you have the time to, teach everyone to use it and adjust prior to that mandate and, that last-minute deadline. So these devices, they actually automatically do many of the things that your driver, might have to do or that they might potentially get dinged for during a violation. So it does make things a lot easier with an engine-connected device. So this can help you, build up your record of clean inspections, while some people that might still be using paper or just the e-log books, might still be kind of struggling with. Now, as an owner-operator, you may just actually even be more likely to be selected if you keep by brokers and stuff, if you've got a clean record and you're placing safety first. So it's really great to have a tangible way to show people that you've got a good record and that you're keeping on top of that and minimizing, potential violations. Now, our device really is the easiest and most affordable ELD compliance solution that you're going to find. There's a low monthly cost. You can have the tools that you need to comply with the ELD mandate without worrying about what it's actually going to cost you in your bottom line at this point. So all you do is you plug the device into the ECM of the truck, it pairs with the Big Road mobile app via Bluetooth, and off you go. So there's not really an expensive, installation or any permanent changes to the truck that's required. You just plug it in, the device pulls the information directly from the computer in the vehicle, and then you can just focus on, driving and not necessarily on the logging portion. So as we've covered, you can use our device as an AOBRD until 2019. So if you choose to go ELD before that date, though, it's really like the flick of a switch. So after this December, when that ELD deadline hits, if you chose to operate with the ELD requirements sooner, you could let us know. It's a simple kind of like an upload of a software update, and then off you go. It's ELD compliant, and the new information will be available on your logs for the inspectors as well. So it's really a choice. It's very straightforward. So speaking of this, I thought, obviously a lot of you are starting to think about implementing something soon. The deadline's approaching. You want to have the time to train your drivers and so forth. And certainly, maybe don't want to procrastinate like some of us do, myself included. So, we wanted to make that transition as easy as possible for you. And so actually, as members of the Truckers B2B, we actually have a special promotion for the members, such as yourselves, that actually is effective until October 31st. Okay, we're currently offering 3 months free for members. And after that 3-month promotional period, the price is just $25 a month. And that will include, obviously, you've got the app for the drivers, but it's the software that you can use to view all of the drivers' logs, and get awareness about who's being compliant and who isn't. You've got the hardware, the reporting that's available, and unlimited online training and support that's going to help you and keep you compliant. So if you actually choose to take advantage of this, this is a special number that you can take down to ensure that we can give you this promotion, that we're aware of what it is that you need. You can call that number. There's also a link below, for specifically to this promotion for Truckers B2B, where you'll be able to click the link to request a demo. And this link I will also be sharing with you momentarily here in the chat window while we're going through the question and answer period. Okay, so that link that we have, I will also share with you in the follow-up email within the next couple of days that will have a recording of the session, and that link will be in there as well. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. Now, if you've got any questions that weren't answered during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the question box in that GoToWebinar control panel. I'm going to give it just a moment while we're waiting for those to come in. And again, just a reminder while we're waiting for those, the Big Road app, for you to see, what that looks like as far as the ELog or the electronic logging is concerned, just the app itself is something that is free for you to download. You can go to iTunes or the Google Play and download those just by doing a search for the road, Big Road, and you will find it. And it just gives you an opportunity to take a look at it. And again, at the end of the session, I will show that phone number again that you can call if you want to request a demo or talk to somebody about the solution as well. So I'm just going to take a second here to see if we've got any questions coming in. So I don't see any questions yet, but you do still have a little bit of time, because one of the things that I did as well was take down some of the really good questions that I've been asked over the last couple of days in these sessions, and some of them I thought were really important to bring up. So I'll bring up a few of those as well and see if any of yours, maybe this might answer questions that you haven't thought of. So one of the questions I had from a lady named Emily was that she wanted some clarification on unassigned miles. So the question was, what will happen, or how will the unassigned miles be accounted for? So to clarify again, unassigned miles, those are miles that are driven without somebody logged in as the driver. So let's say at the end of my shift, I leave my truck in the yard, I go home. At night, a mechanic, someone else picks it up, moves the truck. When I come to log in the morning, now what, right? So unassigned, I take the same truck, but it's been driven overnight, it's moved. So unassigned driving events, as part of the ELD, they're actually tracked at the truck level, so not the phone or tablet. So essentially what will happen is when a driver logs in and connects to our device in that vehicle, right, you'll actually be prompted to claim or reject the unassigned driving time. So it would say to me, the vehicle moved, 3 miles yesterday, was that you? And I could essentially say, yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. Now, if that time is claimed by the driver, it goes on their log. If they reject it, then the administrators would need to prompt someone else, so send that to another driver and ask them to accept that time, or they would just annotate the event for the inspection. So there would actually be a note from the administrator saying, this was for, this was a mechanic that just moved it in the yard, and that's what that 1 mile is. Essentially, there would have to be a note. But in the ELD mandate, drivers will have the option to claim or reject drive time that happened, when no one was logged in prior to them getting into that truck. So I have a really great question here, actually. Thanks, Jenna. So it's, can drivers move from vehicle to vehicle with an AOBRD that's on the driver's phone? Yeah, you can. So, even though the device needs to be mounted in the vehicle, it doesn't necessarily have to be hard mounted, so you can't take it out, right? So some people may, have a tablet or a phone that stays with the driver. Perhaps they're using, a solution for mobile forms, and they need that tablet with them, right? So when you're logging in as a driver, initially it looks for the devices that are nearby, and it gives you an option to pick the truck that you'll be driving. If you get out of that vehicle and go into another vehicle from the mobile app, you definitely have the option to switch trucks. So you could be in 2 or 3 trucks in the same day, and you're logging your hours on those different trucks. As long as each of those vehicles have the device in them installed as well, it's going to search for that Bluetooth connection and connect to that truck as well. So that is a very, very great question. So it can be a phone that a driver takes home with them, and then when they get near the trucks, it's being used to connect to that. So I really hope that answers that question. Now, I did have a question from Sherry as well in regards to the cost. So essentially, the $25 a month, whether it's per unit, yes. So that includes the box in each of the trucks and the information that comes with those. Now, the number that I've provided that I'll post as well, again, that is going to be also the best place to get some answers, not only about pricing, but about tablets, mobile forms, information about the tracking as well. Obviously, with the box in your vehicles, there's a lot more that becomes available to you in regards to telematics, which is great to inquire about and get more information about what else could be available to you as well. Let me see here, just reading a few more questions. Well, this is a great question. So, and I'll see if I can answer this correctly. So if you drive for the last 30 days with an AOBRD, and then the driver spends a month as a short haul driver exemption, can they turn their phone back onto the app and not be connected with the Dash link? So there is actually a provision in the application for short haul. So, rather than having to connect and not connect, there's actually a setting and a checkbox that a driver could say in the app that they are currently doing short haul, which would then log the time, because as a short haul driver, you still need to keep track of your time on duty, but not all of these little events of driving and not driving, right? But you're still keeping it almost as a time card. So there's actually in the app an exception, a rule exception for short haul driving that you can check on and off. So that would definitely, take care of that question, I think. Let's see here. Can the Dash link be removed from an over-the-road truck if the truck gets put on short haul? Yeah, so because it's plug and play, it is easy to, well, I would say easy, but it is, you can unplug it. So there's different ways that you can connect it. Either you choose to just have it plugged in, and usually the device is tucked away under the dash and it stays plugged into the OBD. There is also a Y cable. It's kind of like a splitter of sorts, where you can also use that so that your port stays open and the dash is hidden. So if there's a vehicle that you're repairing or you're getting rid of, you can definitely take those out and put them in another vehicle as well. But you have to know that if that truck then is required to be used for long haul for some reason, it may be safer to have that still in the truck. And then there's also the telematics behind having that device. So you may remove it, but having one of these devices may also allow you to understand where your trucks are going, how they're driving, and have a history of where your truck's going outside of just the ELD stuff and of the hours of service requirements. So by taking the device out, then you lose visibility of that truck and its position as well. So those are just things to consider when you're looking at, do I want a device that goes in and out, or do I just want the app to be put into short haul so that it's not necessarily recording everything that it needs to if we were doing long haul. Hopefully, Jana, that answers that question. Now, I do have a question that was a fairly good question from before. It might apply to some of you, which is in regards to the weight ratings of some of the vehicles. So one of my previous sessions had a question where they had trucks that range from, let's say, 1 ton to Freightliners. They got trailers ranging from, let's say, 9,000 something pounds to 30,000 in gross weight. And they were talking about how much hours they work per day and whether or not the electronic log would affect them. So essentially, as a rule of thumb, if you're currently required to keep records of duty status, you're going to need to run an ELD, again, unless you qualify for one of the exemptions that I mentioned before. And a CMV, a commercial motor vehicle, is actually classified as having a gross weight ranging of 10,001 pounds or more. So you're not necessarily exempt on any of your trucks that are 10,001 pounds or more, right? But if you do have lighter duty vehicles, and you still want to keep a record of duty status, you can actually still use the Big Road mobile app, and then be using that dash link in the other vehicles or just run it as a short haul provision if you just want to use that, if you just want to use that for logging timesheets as well. Okay, let's see if there's anything else, any other questions that we might have. Looks like so far we've been fairly good on time, so that's great. You might even get a couple minutes back in your day. So far, I don't see any further questions. Now, I'll obviously review the chat afterwards, see if there's anything that I've missed. I'll make sure to get in touch with anyone if there's any questions I wasn't able to address, obviously as soon as possible. And again, I'll have to convert the recording. We'll be posting it online. And based on the email that you registered with, we'll be sending you within the next couple of days a follow-up email that has the link. Now, I'm actually going to flip back just before I go, just to make sure as well that you have visibility of that number that you may want to call as well. If you want more information, you want a demo, you want to know more about what's available with the reporting and the tracking and all that stuff, at this number we can answer all of your questions, and they're fully aware of your special promotional offer as well, because we want to make sure that if this is something that you feel will work for you, that you get to take advantage of that. So that number is there. You can also go to Fleet Complete, you can also go to fleetcomplete.com. If you go /TruckersB2B, you will find this promotion and the link to request a demo, and I will be sending that to you as well in those follow-up emails. So if there are no further questions left for today, which I don't believe there are, I just want to thank you again for joining the session, spending this time with me. I really hope that this has helped and that will help you find the right solution for you. So thank you all and have an absolutely fantastic day. Take care, everyone.